Neoliberalism is one of the most influential ideas that many of us have never even heard of. The purpose of this video is to discuss what neoliberalism is and how it has shaped our lives. So what is neoliberalism? In short, it is a set of ideas that affect our economic, political and social lives. For some context, neoliberalism began to emerge in the 1970s. Before that, in the wake of World War II, the economy was more of a mix between the private sector, which is run for profit, and the public sector, which provides public services like healthcare. Following World War II, the welfare state was strengthened and expanded, with public services like the NHS being founded in 1948. Business was quite regulated, and many industries such as British Rail and British Telecom were nationalised and owned by the government. Business and high-income earners paid more tax than they do today, and trade unions, organised associations of workers who support workers' rights, were quite strong. This era is sometimes called the Golden Age of capitalism. Then, during the 1970s, a series of global economic shocks occurred. The ideas of neoliberalism were promoted to encourage economic growth, and it has shaped our economic, political and social landscape ever since. Neoliberal policies were promoted enthusiastically by politicians like Margaret Thatcher in the UK and Ronald Reagan in the United States. But neoliberalism is not tied to any one political party. It was continued by Labour in the UK and the Democrats in the US, and has been sustained by every major governing political party ever since. Neoliberalism has been promoted in most major economies throughout the world and involves making the economy more market orientated, so businesses especially have more freedom. It does this by, number one, deregulation, reducing regulation in the economy, allowing business and financial markets to function with fewer rules and restrictions. Number two, reducing public expenditure by reducing social services and welfare. This is sometimes known as austerity. Number three, reforming taxes, which tends to mean giving tax cuts to businesses and high-income earners. Number four, passing laws that limit the power of trade unions, which can impact workers' pay and conditions. Number five, reducing government control by selling things off to the private sector. Privatisation. So if all these things have happened, how have these changes shaped our lives? Let's look at how this might influence working conditions, inequality, and the wider cultural landscape. First of all, working conditions. The impact of neoliberal policies can perhaps be seen most clearly in our working lives. Work is becoming increasingly insecure. Insecure work characterised by unemployment, gig work, temporary jobs, intermittent agency roles, regular retraining, and frequently applying for new jobs. All this amounts to hours and hours of unpaid work in order to secure paid employment. Many people are also increasingly underemployed, employed in jobs for which they are overqualified and underpaid. This is partly in response to deregulation. Deregulation of workers' protections and the job markets means that often companies don't need to offer reliable, consistent hours, consistent wages, or even sick pay. We've seen this with the increase in zero-hour contracts, in which employers don't have to guarantee any hours for an employee. But deregulation can also involve minimising or removing regulations which hinder profits. Other examples include deregulation of environmental protections, contributing to climate change, and deregulation of the banks, which permitted banks to more freely pursue actions that contributed to the 2008 financial crash, in which millions lost their livelihoods. Insecure work has been described as a feature of neoliberalism, resulting from neoliberal policies, reducing stability for workers in pursuit of greater profits. Meanwhile, for the employed, longer working hours, heavier workloads, and understaffing, often driven by a greater desire for profits, cause significant stress. Low control over the demands placed on us at work is related to poor health outcomes, ranging from stress to chronic disease. Difficulty finding jobs and competition for positions mean many people experience concerns about getting another job if they lose their current role, keeping them in stressful jobs that don't provide them with enough to live on. Furthermore, workers are less able to negotiate with their employers than in the past. Trade unions are less powerful and increasingly encumbered by restrictive legislation as a result of neoliberal laws, such as the Trade Union Act of 2016, and because people are less likely to join a trade union. Part of the reduction in union membership is that people do not have lifelong stable careers in the way that they did in the past. However, trade union membership has started to increase again in recent years, a trend which continued during the pandemic. Ultimately, financial and job insecurity resulting from neoliberal practices can risk everything from our finances to our health, potentially causing symptoms including dizziness and high blood pressure, and mental health conditions like anxiety, depression, burnout, and exhaustion. Perceived competition for jobs can also contribute to the social divides, which we'll be talking about later in this video. Inequality. Decades of neoliberal policies have strengthened the economic, political, and social power of major corporations through their amassing of wealth. Growing profits from deregulation and tax breaks have also contributed to growing inequalities, growing gaps in wealth between the rich and the poor. Inequality within a nation is associated with a range of public health issues, including obesity, teenage pregnancy, crime, and even reduced life expectancy. Inequalities in pay and working conditions also contribute to health outcomes, with lower pay and poorer working conditions negatively impacting health and well-being. A landmark study within the civil service demonstrated that men in the lowest bands, such as messengers or doorkeepers, were 3 times more likely to have died during the 10 years the study was conducted compared to those in the highest grade, who held roles such as administrators. Jobs with a higher income and greater control over your work can improve life expectancy and the number of years spent in good health. A follow-up report in 2020 found a similar pattern across all job types and sectors. Inequality is perhaps one of the greatest risks to health and well-being in the UK. Inequality in the UK is also amongst the highest in the world and has increased since the 1970s. Greater inequality is also linked with rising poverty. Over 1 in 5 of the population of the UK live in poverty, struggling to afford to meet their basic needs. Usually, poverty is associated with being out of work, but in 2018, 13% of adults were facing in-work poverty, being in paid employment, but often still unable to afford rent, heating, or food. Inequalities have sharply risen since the onset of the pandemic, and poverty in working families especially has increased during this time. Both inequality and poverty are worsened by neoliberal policies which promote profits at the expense of individuals and communities by reducing taxes on corporations, cutting social welfare and support, and deregulating workers and environmental rights. Wider influence. Neoliberal policies also encourage a sense of individualism, framing us as workers and consumers in competition in an economy, rather than people in a society. A feeling of insecurity and scarcity of resources, for example jobs, can also promote a sense of rivalry between us as individuals. These issues are potentially caused, or at least exacerbated, by neoliberalism. Economist Guy Standing suggests that there are other outcomes associated with the insecurity brought about by neoliberalism. Insecurity and inequality have been linked with populist political developments, including the Brexit referendum, the rise of Donald Trump on the political right, and the popularity of Jeremy Corbyn and Bernie Sanders on the left. All of these movements, though sometimes divisive, can be thought of in part as responding in different ways to a growing sense of unfairness. But our attitudes are also influenced by the media, that is, information shared via broadcasting, publishing, and the internet. The media can fulfill a collaborative role with media owners, editors, and journalists aligning themselves with the interests of power. The majority of media organisations can therefore perpetuate neoliberal ideas in their output. This might be overt, but more often it is subtly coded in what they choose to cover or what they don't talk about. The media plays a role in shaping public opinion on political issues. Research even suggests that public attitudes tend to follow trends in the portrayal of poverty and inequality by politicians and in the media, rather than what is represented in official figures on the subject. The charity Stop Funding Hate asserts that the media has played a significant role in encouraging these divides in society to boost profits. Analysis of press coverage also suggests that major newspapers, both right and left-leaning, consistently describe people in terms of their economic value, our earnings, spending power, unemployment, or productivity. Here, the real-life impact of these issues, stress, family breakdown, poor well-being, disenfranchisement, political disengagement, or social activism, very rarely get mentioned explicitly. Authors concluded the prevalence of neoliberal ideology normalises a narrative within the media which frames us as workers in an economy, potentially restricting us from examining what these policies mean for our own well-being. Ultimately, the mainstream media is another business operating in a neoliberal landscape. But as the media is traditionally our primary source of information, we often cannot distinguish if it is reporting unfairly or if it is avoiding certain topics altogether. This can be even more difficult to detect when most people are unfamiliar with neoliberal policies and their impact. Perhaps the clearest example is in the narrative surrounding climate change. Shorter showers, recycling, paper straws, individual actions are consistently focused on. But while we are being told to recycle, over 70% of greenhouse emissions are caused by just 100 companies. Through actions including deregulation, austerity, privatisation, and the way these are framed in the public discourse, responsibility shifts onto us as individuals. So this is how neoliberalism can affect the economic and political policies which ultimately influence the social and the cultural landscape, encouraging a competitive, individualist, and fractured society. So what can we do about all of this? In part 2, we'll examine some of the ways to address the challenges we face, challenging the narrative, action through the voting system, and engaging in national campaigns and community work.